All right. Hey, everybody. Gary is in Mexico doing Lord knows what with himself. I'm just kidding with that. Gary lives a pretty clean and pure life, so probably he's not doing the same things that I would be doing in Mexico and Jack would be doing in Mexico. But you guys are stuck with me and Jack today. We may be joined by Matt Anderson to help us host, or it may just be us. So we'll go ahead and get things kicked off. And Gary would have been good about reminding me what week we're on. Jack may know that, but it's a lot of weeks.
It's
Whatever.
80 plus, whatever that
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
80 plus weeks. So, there really have not been a ton of changes this week relative to the last week. So I think most of what we're going to go over in this webinar, so stay tuned, is going to be more on the speculative side of the equation. But we will still have some updates for you that I think Jack's going to go over here in a few in his opening monologue, which I appreciate, Jack. But as far as the stuff that I've generally been asked or talked about this last week, still on North Carolina, just a reminder that when the budget is signed by Cooper, which hopefully it'll be done, by the end of October, it should include some provision around the deductibility of PPP expenses, which means that everybody that's been forced to make a payment hopefully will get either all of that back or some component of that back in North Carolina. Other big updates, obviously, on the federal tax code side of the equation. It's been a lot of brinksmanship lately. But I think in terms of getting clarity of what at least I think will happen with respect to tax rate increases, my own feeling is that the Democrats will probably reach some level of compromise amongst themselves. And then, Manchin has already laid it out. Trump tax cuts got to go, with the limited exception that C corporations should be taxed at 25%, not going back all the way up to 35%. And, capital gains for high income people can settle in at 25%. Everything else that Manchin's been talking about, it's hard to disagree with it. He's basically talking about means testing some of the credits that are in the $3.5 trillion package that they're currently trying to agree on a price point at. So if I was to bet what would happen, what I would bet would happen is that, they'll go ahead and pass the debt ceiling increase in some format that buys us through the end of December. Then the Democrats will get their crap together to be able to use the reconciliation process specifically for the infrastructure bill, so that the reconciliation process is pulled off the table for the debt ceiling. And then it's back to having to compromise on the debt ceiling because you've taken that option off the table. So I think I'm still in the camp of, let's expect to see a tax rate increase probably in 2022 that's going to be some kind of split the difference between Obama and Bush. I think the real thing, again, to remind everybody to keep, what's that mean for, average Joe business owner, probably between 5 and 10% of a rate increase on your ordinary income. I do think, again, the thing that everybody needs to be reminded of and cognizant of is that the estate tax limitation is going to be cut in half. That's a big deal. I think the second thing that snuck in there that everybody's been silent on is that they're also really going to tighten up what you can gift into. The joke that I would have had around gifting in the past about gifting away money is, well, here's the deal. You want to come up with a structure where you don't own anything, but yet still control everything. And you can do that in today's world, but they're talking about taking away some of that control aspect, which is going to make the emotionality around gifting, I think, a little bit more difficult in the same context. So we'll probably go in that in a future webinar. if something becomes more apparent and obvious. But, I still think we're just on the same path towards, tax rate increase, coming up 2022. What does that mean for the stuff that was on the table with fourth quarter, ERTC? I think law of the land was you get the fourth quarter. There is no change in the law. So even though originally there was a shot at having ERTC go away in the fourth quarter of 2021, law of the land is it's on the table for fourth quarter 2021, and we're in the fourth quarter of 2021. So it's here for now. So I think that it's probably the only kind of other question mark that we've had sitting out there. So Jack, what have you seen?
So I think it is similar to what you're saying, which is, and I probably just because this is traditionally what we've been doing is just to give a background on what all this stuff means, and just kind of, so of course I found a pretty good article that I'm going to read from, because it just, pretty much sums it up as far as kind of what this is. So, and I put a little drama into it as well, as per usual, right? So, okay. So, and as you can see, I'm back in my home office now. They found me and they kicked me out of Washington. So it's all good. So the country is on the precipice of a financial calamity, and Democrats are on the verge of potentially altering the contours of the Senate with a potential one-time rules change that would enable them to pass a debt ceiling increase well ahead of the October 18th deadline. It's a strategy that Democratic leaders have been socializing since last week, but the idea got a serious boost on Tuesday night when President Biden said it's a real possibility. So the options are essentially that, and without getting into how how they would change the rules, there's the possibility that they are able to change the rules, which get around the filibuster. There is that the Democrats do the reconciliation process, which we've talked about in the past, as far as getting things through Congress. And then obviously if the Republicans relent, which is not going to happen. So to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about, I also have a little bit of information that is helpful. And so this article starts out by saying the debt ceiling is exactly what it sounds like. The maximum that the federal government is allowed to borrow. And there's a maximum because Congress set it's about 100 years ago or so, curtailed government borrowing. But instead of sticking to it, Congress has gone ahead and raised the limit every time it's been hit. So the arguments in favor are generally the same, that it's money that's already been spent, and raising the debt limit just lets us keep paying back our creditors. Another is that failing to raise the limit would cause the U.S. to default on some of its obligations, triggering a crisis in the financial system. The reasons against it are simpler. Outstanding public debt is about 28.7 trillion. That's a hard number to choke down, and it's getting larger every second. So people who are really concerned about the public debt will add in the currently unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Social Security and argue that total US liabilities are somewhere north of $156 trillion. So they're basically saying that the number officially is 28.7 trillion. But if you start adding in all of these liabilities that have not been funded, you end up in the $150+ trillion range. And so that's basically what we're talking about, and how all this is going to happen. And there are arguments on both sides as to why you should, why you shouldn't. Is it more of the same? Is it just basically saying, let's kick the can down the road and let our grandkids figure it out? So all those things. So that's really what this is all about, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I can only recall a few times that the government actually shut down for a period of time. There actually was last week a partial shutdown before the temporary spending that ends, I think tomorrow, runs out. And there were people that were furloughed for a short period of time. Didn't hear a whole lot about that, but that's what happened. And it would be at a much larger scale if they don't figure it out. The reality is that they're going to figure it out. And so it's a matter of compromise and to see who's going to give in on what, but everybody's after their own special interests. And what is in this, like, okay, yeah, do we basically, so it's kind of like, you have different loans, and as well, do we fund it, do we pay for it, or do we ask for an extension and kind of put this over here to the side and deal with it in 2022 or later? So anyway, just a few points.
Yeah, and side note, I just saw my breaking news that there is a deal on extending the debt ceiling till December. So, and again, it's funny because even though it's wrong, it just sounds so much better to say, well, I'm not voting any more increases in that debt to cover all this crazy spending the Democrats want to do. Like, even though that's factually not correct about what's happening, it's such a better soundbite than, no, you need to raise it to cover all the spending you did like drunken sailors on the tax cut you put in place. And then the global zombie apocalypse we just came through where we were doling out a bunch of money. So, which is the actual reality of what we're trying to pay for now, which is the past and everything that was incurred up to this point. So it is interesting from that standpoint.
And there's also the aspect of back scratching. So things that were promised maybe in 2019, 2020, that, okay, yeah, I'll help you push yours through, but in years down the road, when I want something, you're going to be there for me, right? And then, which is a lack of foresight that there's going to be other problems, or they're going to need more money or things like that. So you have promises that are trying to be kept that can't be kept unless the ceiling is increased.
Right. So with that in mind, as I said, it was a pretty light week in terms of changes, just a lot of brinksmanship. I think, next couple months, we probably will see a lot of changes. But with that in mind, if you guys do have questions, go ahead and post them in the Q&A sections, and save the hazing of me and Jack for and each other for the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to see if anybody that's participating has any questions for this week that we can answer for you. And if you don't, then we won't force you to stay until noon.
I think while we're waiting for a moment, also on people's minds is the continuing discussion about the mask and vaccinations and doing it in the workplace and the results of that. And it was interesting. I was listening to a reporter this morning. Actually, it was a lawyer, not in town. It was national news. And he was saying that he's getting a lot of phone calls from clients and prospect clients who are upset because, and the thing is, it's both ways. It's like, I have to go into a workplace where I know there are people that are not vaccinated and my company's not doing anything about it. And the flip side is that I'm being forced to be vaccinated or else they're going to kick me out. And the answer was very concise, which is workers have at this point little rights other than those exceptions that we talked about, religious exceptions and medical exceptions. And then when they start talking about the religious exceptions, it was there are some religious leaders, faith leaders, that have taken a position that according to their faith, they can't take the immunization. But yet what I didn't know is there are certain chemicals in some of the over-counter drugs that we use. So if it is, and I think they were using stem cells as an example, in that some of the medicines that we have, and hopefully, and I didn't know this, and hopefully I'm not grossing people out by saying this, but you may want to look at the ingredients in your medications next time, like some things that you use on maybe a more routine basis that have certain chemicals or biological agents in them. But the example it was stem cells. And that, so once a leader of a faith-based or religion says, well, it's part of our culture, part of our beliefs, that we can't put that in us, then it is okay. Well, and they base it on the fact that it's biological or whatever it may be. Are you taking stuff over the counter that has this stuff in it? And likely the answer is yes. So it's basically being hypocritical. And I think it was just an interesting kind of tangential side note that it's not so easy to say, well, religious belief that we don't want to do this. It has to be grounded in science, even though it's religious. And then the science, if you are okay with it in one instance, but not in the other. So, but it was very interesting. And so the message at the end of that interview was that be careful what you do, because you may be throwing away your career. And he was saying that people came to him after they decided to walk out the door and then try to do something about it and sue their employer. And the employment lawyer basically said, there's nothing I can do for you in this moment, because it just hasn't, the law hasn't developed, the case law hasn't developed, statutes haven't been put in place. And even if they were, they're going to be challenged. So we're just in a very nebulous and gray area in so many things right now. And so what I am saying to all of you is, don't be hasty in your decisions. It's okay to be principled on one way, on one side or the other, but sometimes just if you can't get to the end result based on your principles without having to compromise them, you may have to go with the flow a little bit in order to basically put a meal on your table and those kind of things. So I'm not saying compromise your principles. I'm just saying don't be hasty.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, with seeing, other states start to, force mandates to force vaccinations to even be enrolled in school. I mean, I don't know. It seems like the writing is on the wall on this one. So, sorry, about your beliefs, if your beliefs are, to not get vaccinated, but it just seems like the room is just getting smaller and smaller in terms of the places that you could go with that. I mean, if you can't, it's funny. Gary always jokes with me about, yeah, but aren't you a libertarian? The answer to that is yes. And the libertarian viewpoint on vaccines is homeschool your kids then. not send them to school unvaccinated if they have the ability to get vaccinated. It's more like you vote with your feet. Your feet's called homeschool, So it just seems like everything is just shrinking down in terms of where you're gonna be able to hide on or hide, get behind or hide behind on this one. So any questions and I think with the 100 employer mandate, I mean, from what I've seen, that's pretty much, kind of at the end of the year is probably when we're going to see that go into effect. Is that a fair characterization, Jack?
I think so, because there's just a lot of logistics that go behind that, which is, okay, how do we implement that? How do you coordinate that with insurance? How do you enforce it? I mean, so all those things, there has to be a process. It's interesting because I don't know what the parameters are, but just down the road in a few hours, the lovely Speed Street starts up. And I say that kind of, maybe that was an unfair tone to take, but I mean, it kind of mucks up traffic and things up here for all of us. And, I get it. It brings in a lot of money for the city and for the county, and it's a great event. And I'm not in town this weekend to be able to go to the race, or otherwise I probably would go see the Roval. I noticed that they had at Romeo Bearden, it's all cordoned off and they have access points. And I'm wondering what are they going to do about that? Is it, are they going to require you to show negative tests? Do you have to wear a mask? And so, I'm not going, so I didn't get involved in looking into what all that is about. But, there are just, and you see it everywhere that you go. It's people, even if there's a mandate, they're kind of half-assing it. Some of them are doing it. Some of them are doing it when they're going to might get caught. Or it was funny downstairs. We have security guards in the building. I'm in one of the B of A buildings, and was standing in line at Starbucks, and there were some people that were not wearing masks. And then what was interesting is security guard came by, and it wasn't any big deal. When the CMPD officer came by, everybody's reaching for their pockets to put their masks on. It was funny. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And so it's just it's just craziness. And I wish I could on this program say, this is the rule, this is what you have to do, because that's all we want to know. We want to know what the rule is and either decide to follow it or not. But there's just so much controversy. We talked about this in prior weeks. School boards hassling with it, trying to figure it out, different school boards doing different school things within school systems. When I think this was down in South Carolina, maybe in Rock Hill, where the governor said it was optional. And then the parents were saying, or no, it was, yeah, they were saying it's optional. The school went mandatory. And then it's just a whole hubbub of parents getting upset. What was also interesting, and I'm kind of ashamed to say this, which is when I was at home and I was watching, I had the news on, local news on the background, and went to one of those talk shows. And I got hooked because it was a guy who is not a parent, but was screaming at one of the administrators who was administering the rules that were set forth by the superintendent of that school system, which was also mandated all the way from the governor's office all the way down. And so this guy was just screaming at this, and it was on video. And then, so it was, I can't remember who the host was trying to get this guy to admit that he doesn't have a stake in, he doesn't have an interest, doesn't have a stake in the game. Well, I have nephews and nieces and but they're trying to get to admit that regardless of his position, his behavior was inappropriate. Yeah. And that's all they wanted him to say. And he would not say it. And we're like, come on, just, and she's being very gracious. She's like, look, we all make mistakes. We all have positions, heat of the moment, but just really, and he just would not say it. I'm like, and that's what hooked me. I'm like, okay, because they go to commercial break. And I'm like, surely in the next segment, he's going to say it. He's going to break down all emotional, that's what these shows are all about. But so anyway, sorry to digress, but I just thought that was
that's all right. Well, we'll go last call for any questions that anybody might have on the call. And otherwise, if we don't have any, then we will go ahead and call it for you guys. So that is crowd. Yeah, light crowd. So light crowd, not a lot of changes. So going once, going twice, sold. So, what we'll do is hopefully we're going to see some more progress coming up next week, and we'll have something a little bit more to talk about with respect to any other changes that we see happening. So appreciate you guys all being here, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
All right, bye.